Hi everyone, we'll begin shortly. Just hold on for a minute.
This is kind of a continuation from our last session on metrics and measurement. As you can see, the title has changed to metrics and outcomes, and there is a specific reason why, right? And we'll discuss that in much more detail. We'll focus a lot about understanding outcomes and the value of outcomes, right, in the industry. So that's set B. There are several other concepts that we'll understand today, especially what does ownership mean, why do metrics exist, how are they used in the industry, and we'll use a case study um, to kind of understand this in a deeper manner, right? So why metric, right? Um, First of all, just a quick revision for those who may have missed the earlier sessions. Um, Metric is basically a measurement taken over a period of time, right? So if you recall, we had discussed what is attrition. So you take a measurement at date one, and you take a measurement at date two, and you do a difference and the percentage change of that measurement over a period of time, you get a metric called attrition, right? And similarly, there are several of such metric used in the industry. There are engineering metric, there are customer support metric. Engineering metric could focus on engineering velocity, engineering quality, um, you know uh, depth of tree in coding, or defect escape rate. There are several engineering metric to figure whether uh, the engineers and the engineering teams are doing their job well. And when I say doing their job, I am talking about delivering for the corporate, delivering for the company that they work for, right? There could be customer support metric, like mean time to respond, which means that if there are hundreds of customer tickets coming in, then how much time does it take on an average for the customer support team to respond to these tickets, right? To do the first response to customers. They even track it to a level where we are talking about how much time does a customer take to get the first response, and then subsequently the closure on the ticket, right? So there could be several reasons and several ways that these are tracked, but essentially, the why question can be answered in couple of ways, right? One, why do we do this, is because it induces a certain behavior. The what we have found, working in the industry for long, is that you track a certain metric, you track a certain KPI. By the way, a KPI is a special kind of metric, right? Key performance indicator is also a metric. It just has that special status because companies only track maybe a handful of KPIs at the highest level. So what is the most important thing, right? So if you track something and if you let everybody know in your company that this is my most important thing that I'm tracking, then it induces the right kind of behavior where people start working towards that particular goal, right? And it brings a certain level of focus that, oh, what is important for me and my company? This one number, right? This 5% change in revenue for this quarter is important for my company. I'll only focus on that, right? It gives you kind of the right guardrails, it gives you the right perspective in chasing what you're doing, helps you in multiple ways, right? And we'll talk about some of that moving forward. um, I'll keep ownership mindset to a little later. We'll definitely go deeper in it. And then why outcomes, right? That's the main thing that we are going to focus on overall. But two things to remember. One is, what is not measured, it's not is not true, right? And if you don't measure it, it's not fixable. Okay, so whenever um, you know somebody asks me, why do we spend all this time collecting all this metric, right? So number one is that, how do you even know where you are today, right? It's like going to a doctor and saying that, I think I have fever. The first thing the doctor would say is, let me take your temperature and other um, stats of your body, right? Blood pressure and blood glucose, and anything else that the doctor thinks is important data, right, to make a decision. So, like the doctor bases their decision on what the metric is, what has been the change over a period of time, right? How rapidly your fever changed, the temperature changed over a period of time, will give the doctor an indication on what kind of remedy should they suggest to you, right? Very similar to that in businesses. If you know the trend, if you can see the trend, if you get regular alerts and notifications around the trend, you also get to understand what kind of changes, what proactively you need to do so that you keep the target safe, right? You keep the pursuit of the target safe. And then lastly, it helps you, it's a great weapon. We had talked about um, articulation and communication, right? So if you recall, whenever we talk about articulation, we are talking about the power it has, right? The power of conviction, the the confidence of delivery. Where does that come from? It comes from data, right? You can use data as a weapon. People will stand up and listen to you if you are presenting data in a neutral manner, and then presenting your insights and opinions of that data, right? Okay, so that's kind of a quick revision of metrics and measurement, as well as what you're going to dive deeper. Now, here is kind of couple of statements, right? What I would love for you to do is spend maybe a minute or two in reading these statements and tell me what you think about the first one, which is I run 5 kilometers every day. Okay, first statement. Second statement is that my blood pressure is back to normal because of my daily running over the last 6 months. So take a minute and send in your observations on what these statements mean. What are they about? Okay, so let's analyze the first statement. Remember, um, there is a technique, right, to analyze even a sentence. So, in the first statement, what jumps out to you is run 5 kilometers. Okay, every day means there is a certain level of frequency to this. There is a measurement which is in kilometers, and there is quantification which is 5, and then there is action which is your running, right? So you have everything in that small sentence. Okay, let's look at the second one, which is my blood pressure is back to normal because of my daily say of your age and your weight and anything else that goes to contributing blood pressure, right? So everybody has their own range, and seems like this person has gotten their blood pressure back in the normal range by maybe running those 5 kilometers every day. So they did their daily running and they got their blood pressure back in normal range. Okay, so the big thing that you observe between these two statements is that the first statement is not an outcome statement, right? I run 5 kilometers every day, yes. So what was the outcome? You can't, you have not defined what outcome you got. What did you gain out of running 5 kilometers every day? But the second statement talks about outcome. And as you can see, blood pressure coming back to normal is an outcome. Okay. The action which caused that outcome was this running every day. So that is something which you will get hit in the industry, or in your academic curriculum. Each time you talk about something which you have achieved, start thinking about whether I'm talking about an output or am I talking about an outcome, right? And we'll go a little deeper in this because like it is Satkam's goal to expose early employees and students to what is important in the industry. And this is one thing which is important in the industry, which is thinking outcomes, right? Thinking in terms of outcomes all the time rather than talking about output, right? um, there are several examples where we can talk about the differences between output and outcome, and we'll go through some of them, right? All right. So my question to everyone, right? And the answer is on the screen. But why do companies hire anyone, right? Why do companies hire people? Why do they want to keep them over a long period of time? Or who do they want to keep? They hire, let's say, 100 people with a goal in mind, right? But that goal has not been achieved as yet. Why do the companies hire them at all, right? That's question number one. And the question number two is, who are those people who companies keep, right, in their jobs for a long time? Think about that answer and let me know what you what your view is. Okay. While you're doing this, I would bring your attention to being curious, right? Um, a trait which helps you ask questions before jumping to answers. So please ask me questions if you want to get to the answer. Second, uh, apply all the critical thinking, problem solving techniques that we have taught. How do you do critical thinking on any problem that is given to you? What is critical thinking? How do you look at, what are the traps or the hindrances to being a good critical thinker? um, and then problem breakdown and solving also, right? How do you break problem down, how you break it into chunks which are deliverable, and then how do you prioritize those chunks, and um, what solutions options you have, and then creating a feasible plan out of it, right? So that's please recall all those techniques also. All right. So coming back to the question, why do companies hire anyone? The answer is on the screen. Companies don't pay for activity, they pay for impact, right? So what companies want you to do when you join them, or why do the companies hire you at all, is to solve problems, right? If you are a good problem solver, then you have a longer life in the company. That's as simple as it gets, right? And thus, I want to point you to the two key differences between what would you focus on even in your academic period, or in your early employment, or later in career progression also, right? The focus should always be what you have in green there, which is outcome. What is the impact, and how much impact my work has caused to the company. Okay. If you keep that front in center, you will always be headed towards the north star, right? The north star is like one metric, which is a success metric typically for a company. All right. So let's look at some of the activities on the left side. Seems like this is an engineering team. Given that we have lot of engineering employees and engineering students, we took an engineering example, a software engineering example, or you could say even applicable to mechanical or other industries. So you're building features, okay? You are what is engineers, what is the activity that engineers are doing, right? Writing code, deploying models, closing tickets, and building features. Okay. All the right activities, they have been assigned those activities and they're doing this diligently. What the company is interested is how much of my customers' behavior has changed because they have started using this new feature, right? Remember, you know, there was a time when um, YouTube kind of started losing popularity, but it's back again, right? As a big content provider, they switched their strategy. They looked at what is important, what how is my consumer changing their behavior, and how do I get into that habit, that new habit that my consumer has formed. So if the consumer thinks that short form content is the one that I will look at more, I will look at more talk shows and podcasts, um, and I would love to have recommendations, then that's the way to go. And YouTube, if you recall, they changed that. They didn't have all this only a few years ago, right? I mean, if you go like 5 years back, YouTube was just a place where you put up your content and several people can watch it, right? But they have changed their product also significantly over the last 5 years. If you look at Another kind of outcome that the company looks at is the performance gain, right? How much faster is my product now? It could be applicable to a vehicle, a car, or a bike. When I say faster, I don't necessarily mean by speed, yeah, but it could be speed too. For example, in a e-commerce case, how fast is my website? Because it is going to help my customers do their job faster, right? I have to keep my website fast, high performing website. Or how efficient is my bike? How efficient is my car? Right? Because these are the outcomes which the customers are interested in. Are they really interested in, oh, this engineer or this engineering team spent 70 hours last week working on this problem and they solved it? They're not, right? Working 70 hours on the problem is on the left side, it's the output. But what the customers and the company is interested in is what was the outcome of those 70 hours of work, right? And the outcome was this 2 kilometer mileage gain. That's a big number though. Your car was running at 15 kilometers per liter until last week, and your engineering team put in a lot of effort and they moved the needle from 15 to 17 kilometers, and that's the new feature, that's the new performance gain that you're launching the new vehicle with, right? That's a huge gain, and you can now sell that huge gain to the customers also. There are several, so we won't go deeper into everyone, but as you can see, if you start talking in terms of outcomes, your behavior, your targets, your daily form of delivering what you're doing all gets focused on the outcomes as you move forward, right? Okay, so let's move to the next one. um, we'll like everybody to spend again 2 minutes thinking about these two engineers. They are talking. They did exactly the same work, by the way. Okay, the same exact work that both engineer A and engineer B did, but look at how they are delivering. Look at what data they are speaking with when they are talking about their work. Okay, I'll give you maybe 15 seconds to ponder on this and we'll talk about this. Okay, so remember that why would people listen to you when you speak? Here is one reason, right? Engineer A is saying that I closed 150 tickets. Tickets are bugs in software, and he closed 150 of those, right? Over a period of whatever, let's say 6 months, right? And 20 features were shipped. So much output, right? We did a lot of hard work and we fixed 150 tickets, and we brought out 20 new features for our customers and we shipped them to customers. Okay, that's how engineer 1 is talking about their work. Okay, now let's look at how engineer 2, who has exactly done the same thing, is talking about their work, right? So engineer B is basically saying that I reduced the downtime by 40%. So those 150 tickets and the 20 features that I shipped in the last 6 months caused a reduction in downtime by 40%. So if my downtime was 20 hours in the last month, this month that downtime has come down to 12 hours, right? I reduced it by 40% is what the second engineering saying. And that's huge, right? Because the downtime is something which the customer is directly affected by. If you are telling the customer that our website's uptime has gone up several notches, the customer is going to be happy because the customer directly feels the impact of your change, right? And which also means that you have more engaged customers. Engaged customers are buyers, and you want buyers, right? Your customer to give you repeat business, as well as your prospect to turn into customers. The second is increase retention by 12%. So retention is nothing but either revenue retention or customer retention, right? So you're talking in terms of what is important to the company and what is important to the customer. And in this case, retention, which is customer retention, is important, which means that those 20 features that you ship to the customer really liked, and lesser number of customers fled your product. So when you speak about what did you do, what did you deliver, start speaking about the outcomes, right? So that's one technique. You could call it an articulation technique, or you could call it a thinking technique also. All right. Now, here are some of the traps that one needs to avoid. Since we are mostly addressing engineers today, we picked an engineer example. But if you are a an architect or a lawyer, or uh, you know any other non-engineering student or employee listening to us, this still becomes applicable to you as well, right? So this is kind of that trap. You love talking about how much hard work I put last week. Remember our 150 tickets example? um, I fixed so many things last week. I shipped 20 features in the last 6 months. Why do we like that language, right? Because it gives you something with where you have direct control on. It is easy to measure, that I can measure my work, but can I really measure, how my customer was satisfied because of my work? More difficult, right? So you start talking in terms of your own work. And then there is short term validation, right? Closing a ticket gives you instant gratification that you did something good that day, and you talk about that more than talking about how that ticket closure has helped your end customer, how that ticket closure has helped your company, right? So this is just, I would say, awareness. Be aware of this and avoid this trap. All right. Now, looking at kind of a picture, right, on how and where do these KPIs come from. If my company is saying that, I have to increase revenue by X%, or, I have to reduce my downtime by Y%, I have to increase retention by Z%, where are all these numbers coming from, right? So just so that you understand it as in slightly better, we created this slide. By the way, one thing which you will observe is throughout this deck, all the slides that are created by Notebook LM, and that's the beauty of AI now. None of these slides, by the way, are original thinking of AI. Okay, the original thinking is ours. That belongs to Satkam. We put it on paper. We actually wrote down what we think is the right way to conduct this session, to conduct this topic. Once we had the content ready, we asked Notebook LM to go build these slides, and they built beautiful slides, right? But the content is completely ours. The content is completely Satkam. Okay, so the way the KPIs are inherited, right? They're not bottoms up; they're always top down. Okay, so you can think about what the company vision is, what the company strategy is. Remember, we talked about strategy, and that strategy driving annual goals. Let's say the strategy is I want to improve my revenue in Southeast Asia, and for that I'm going to do XYZ things. Those things translate into the actual goals, right? Okay, if I have to go to 5 countries in Southeast Asia, I have to go there over a 3 year period. Then which are the 3 countries which I'm going to do this year? Okay, and now you are going to put those 3 countries in this year's annual goal, right? If you know that, okay, you know what, I'm going to launch my product in Indonesia in this year, then you start thinking about what is my KPI, right? How will I measure success of that launch in Indonesia? What are the top 2 or 3 things which I will track, which will tell me that yes, this product got launched in India, in Indonesia, and is successful there, right? What are those measures, and how are they linked to my business? Okay, so those are my key performance indicators. Some people call OKRs also. I mean, the difference between KPIs and OKRs, since today we are talking about a lot about metrics and measurement, I'll love to cover that also. KPIs are end state indicators, right? They indicate what has been achieved and whether you are close to your target or you're away from your target, right? That's what KPIs will tell you. And it's a great way to figure, whether you are on target or not. So KPIs, you're driving a car, they are like the dashboard. They're telling you where are you today. You are, let's say, driving at 40 kilometers an hour. The economy zone is between 40 to 70, so you are just at the border of that economy zone. If you step up on the accelerator, you will get into the economy zone of driving your car. Okay, so it's just telling you where you are today. Now what I said is stepping on your accelerator, that is OKR. Okay, how do you drive your business towards a specific KPI? Those are defined by objectives and key results. So if you have to, my KPI, for example, in 6 months time is bringing my blood pressure down to whatever, let's say, um, 70, 110. Okay, that's assuming a good level for me. If I have to bring it to that level from wherever it is today, then what are the 2 or 3 things I'm going to do? I'm going to do something on my diet side, maybe exercise and sleep. Okay, these 3 things which I talked about: diet, exercise, sleep, these are going to help me bring my blood pressure down, right? Just watching that blood pressure needle is not going to bring it down, right? That's the KPI. But the action that I'm going to take is I'm going to change my diet, I'm going to change my sleep pattern, and I'm going to change my exercise pattern, right? Those are the actions. So that is where it's like stepping on the accelerator and being in control of driving your own car, right? So those are the big differences between KPI and OKRs. These are terms which are widely used in the industry, and uh, they most of the industries, at least all of the industries that I have been in, they always have these North Star metric, these high level metric, which then cascade to the team level, which is okay, at a high level, if you want to achieve this, what is your team going to achieve? What is your team's contribution margin towards that high level achievement? Okay, so that's it, how it cascades. And then at the last level, if my team wants to achieve XYZ, then what should I be contributing to, which is my individual metric, right? So that's how the metric cascade happens in companies. All right. So there are few other terms that you will run into as you get exposed to industry. But talking in those terms, thinking about these terms will help you make right choices, right? This is kind of the data that you seek either before or after. Before or after what? Whatever event, right? If you're going to measure revenue at the end of the month, then what are the indicators before that end of the month that you will hit the revenue? And then what are the indicators after, where you have actually talking about what has happened, right? And then these indicators also tell you what is going to happen in the future. So these are the kind of signals that industries love to look at. There are some signals which tell you what will happen. Okay, so if my engagement rates, my retention rates, my performance, my system uptime is at a certain level, it tells me that last 5 times this happened, my revenue did not meet expectations, or last 5 times this happened, my nps actually increased, my customers were very happy, and I increased profit. So these are some of the indicators which are telling you what may happen in the future, right? And then there are some indicators which are called lagging indicators, which are post facto, right? Which are looked at after the event has happened. Let's say 31st March has passed, the financial year is closed. Now you will look at all the financial reports from the last financial year, right? And it will tell you all the indicators of how you did in the last financial year. Or end of the year, we talk about, okay, what was achieved in the last year in December, and I'm talking at an individual level, that how many steps did you walk in the entire year, right? That gives you, that's a lagging indicator, and so on, right? So these are the two types of indicators, again widely used in the industry. um, and then there is what is called as the causality test. Okay, what is the causation? um, there is this mental model, right? Sorry, this notion of causation and correlation, C and C. And the trap that you want to avoid is to differentiate on what caused what effect versus what is correlated with that effect, right? So look at this test. you know um, you There are hundreds and hundreds of metric that the industry collects. Are you going to be using all of those metric in um, tracking your success, not just at your level but at team level? Probably, but you don't know how to get there. What are the good metrics that you could select, right? So look at the questions that you need to ask yourself, that I have these 15 metric, engineering metric, that I can use, but how many of these metric are really going to help me? These are not vanity metric, these are validated solid metric which will guide the performance, right? My own performance and my company performance. So first one, what macro goals does this influence? Okay, if your metric cannot talk about what is the macro goal, what is the big picture that it influences, okay, the metric itself may not be that macro goal. But if you're tracking metric on, let's say, um, landing page load time, okay, in software terms, you have a website and it takes a finite amount of time to load that website, then that is basically a metric that you're capturing. And the change in that metric, which is going to be in milliseconds, right? I improved, let's say, my website loading time by 15 milliseconds, and to be able to trap that, I'm capturing so much of data, right? But if I can't explain why I'm capturing all that data, it's going to lead me to a decision on, let's say, um, whether in the future I should pay attention to this metric at all or not. Then it is important for me today, right? Or the slowness of my website, can it be covered by horizontal scaling, by any other way that I can use, instead of me investing time in the performance of my website. If that is the goal, then yes, you can say that there is a macro goal attached to my current metric. Second is this a leading or lagging indicator? We have talked about it enough. You can you can think about leading indicators being able to tell you what may happen, and that gives you a chance of course correction. So lead indicators are top priority. If there are too many lag indicators that you are looking at, discard them. Third, can engineering actually control it? Is it really in my control? If I'm looking at some sales data, okay, whereas my job is to deliver features which will lead to customer satisfaction, am I really going to track about individual sales and how this sales is happening, and what how is that metric going to help me? No, discard it. Does tracking it drive a behavior change? So if I start tracking everybody by outcomes instead of output, it is going to give me a behavior change. So I would rather track an outcome metric than an output metric, right? If all of this passes, then you have a valid metric that you're talking. You should go ahead with that. Okay. Let's look at a case study. Let's say we are in education technology. Our company name is edutech x, let's call it edx. Okay. So this company, our goal that the CEO has defined for us is 20% upside in revenue. I want my revenue to go up by 20%. The completion rate go up from 40% to 52%. As you know, completion rate is quiz completion, right? I mean, a lot of times I have seen that in my product, students or whoever my audience, right, they start a test but they don't complete a test. And that completion rate, which basically is a very low number today, that out of every 100 students that start a test, only about 40% of the students are ending the test, right? And that's not a good measure for me. My CEO has set a goal of 52%. We should cross the 50% mark. Let's aim at 52% completion rate. Attendance. So the attendance is also low and declining. And we are trying to figure, why is it so? Is it because students are finding the knowledge everywhere now, with especially with AI and AI engines helping them? The students are finding this knowledge everywhere else. So seems like that the student attendance has gone down. Or is it my content? Is it lack of availability of time? What is it? But whatever it is, I want to cause a 15% upside, and then similarly retention improvement and so on. There are 4 teams which have been given this task, right? And we will look at again, thinking always from the perspective of impact, right? How these KPIs cascade, right? There is a concept of a ladder, which is a ladder from your personal metric to the company KPIs, and how you are able to influence your company KPIs through your own work, right? So, and when I say your, now you belong to a marketing team, and how the whole team's delivery influences the top goal and so on, right? So we'll look at how the ladder is built. Okay, so stalled platform, my business is not doing that great. So my board, my CEO has given strategic goals at the bottom, as you can see. 20% increase in revenue, improve learning success, improve reliability. Platform has 1 million total users, completion rate is at 40%. The revenue is not going anywhere, meaning it has been flattish for a pretty long period of time. As you can see, the trajectory is almost flat. um, and the symptoms, some of the things which my data is telling me, that my videos are buffering, my quizzes are crashing while somebody is taking a test, my quiz or my test crashes, right? So I can't expect students to complete the test when I am myself am not providing the right infrastructure, right? And then there are 60% drop offs. So why so many people are dropping off in a week also? Okay, so let's look at team by team how every team thinks about these top level goals. And this is how, by the way, it happens in the industry, folks. So the marketing team, looking at the same goals, exact same goals, are thinking about what is my acquisition quality, right? The acquisition is new customer acquisition, right? And if I acquire the right customers, they are going to stay with me longer. There is no point in acquiring thousands of customers and then the customers finding out that that product is not meant for them and they leave and go somewhere else. Okay, that is actually going to negatively impact the metric that I have on my website, right? So the other is, how do I re-engage somebody who has been there on my system earlier? How do I re-engage those people? And the lastly, how do I monetize it, right? So our marketing team has taken up a goal that I will do three things, right? I will do life cycle marketing. And life cycle marketing is like, I will send notifications in emails to my students that, hey, you know what, you started this test, you left it at 60%, can you go finish it? um, or reminders to students that, hey, you haven't visited my website for long. Have you done your daily 10-minute practice today, and so on, right? And I expect that it will help me by 6 to 8% completion. Okay. Segmented paid campaign, my students are appearing for, gate and JE exams. There is final year placement prep happening. um, how do I target, those students? Because my website provides those kind of quizzes, um, which improves the quality. There is no point in just having every student on my website. I want those students who are aspirants for those particular tests, and I am a provider of those tests, so those become a great segment for me to go after. That's what the marketing team is saying. And then referrals and gamified growth, right? So I'm going to do, gamification. I'm going to say, invite two friends and unlock a premium test series. Okay, so I'll give you more if you bring more of your kind, right? And then who is the leaderboard, right? So who has scored the most? It is a healthy competition. We are not saying that, marks are everything, but competition is everything, right? As you step into the industry, you will find a lot of competition everywhere. It's all, it needs be healthy. Anyway, so I'll introduce something like this on my website, and that's what marketing is contributing. We expect that out of the total revenue growth, we will influence about 30% of the revenue growth. So remember, our target was 20%. So let's say we are a 100 crore company. Our CEO has given a target of increasing that 100 crore by 20%. So take us to 120 crores. So the total revenue growth is 20 crores, and what my marketing team is saying is that I will contribute 30% of that 20 crores. So out of that 20 crores, 6 crores will come from all these efforts that you see on the screen from marketing. Let's look at what engineering is doing, right? So engineering saying that I will break down long tests into short 5-minute test. Okay, it helps because the attention span is is low, and with 5-minute test it will actually help students complete and gain more confidence. I'll reduce that. And then I will add a feature called resume anytime. Today I do not have that feature. Today I deliver a test to the students. Either they submit it, complete it end to end and submit it right away, or they have to retake it if they have to do it some other time if they leave it halfway. But I will give them a resume anytime kind of a feature. So they take 50% of the test today, they come back and they take the rest of the test later in the week. This will give me an overall impact of 8 to 12% completion rate improvement. From a engineering perspective, they will also look at insta feedback, weak area insights, so score breakdown, the impact, 5 to 7% retention is what they are looking at from an impact perspective. So look at now how the language is changing, right? The engineering language is no more about I will deliver so many lines of code, I will deliver so many features. The engineering language is about the impact. 5 to 7% retention, 4 to 6% completion rate, 30 to 40% on the biggest driver, which is the revenue, right? 6 to 10% improving in attendance. So attendance, retention, revenue, all these are outcomes. And now the engineering has started talking in terms of outcomes. Okay. If you look at how the customer team is doing, I won't go detail into every slide. So customer is looking at reduction in churn and the improve in overall trust of the product, so that it drives the re-engagement. And you guys know, the more people are engaged or re-engaged in your product, it is going to only help you in recurring revenue. So that's how there are several things that customer support team is doing, and they are saying that our contribution is going to be 50 to 20% to the overall impact, which is revenue. DevOps team. Okay. So DevOps team, what are they going to do? They are going to do platform speed optimization, zero downtime during peak hours, real time monitoring and alerts. So they are going to do their own stuff, and they say that we will contribute to 10 to 15% to the impact, right? So it's like the CEO has set up a goal that I want 20% improvement in revenue. Okay, what are the two things which will drive that revenue? I want completion rate of to move from 40% to 52%, and I want attendance to go up by 15%. Engineering is now taking that 40 to 50%, 52% goal, and they are saying that out of that percentage, that 12 percentage, right, I will contribute 15% of that 12%. Okay, marketing is saying I will contribute 6% of that 12%. Support is saying same thing, and so on, right? And then there are other efforts. It's not like my effort towards completion is not going to help my effort towards attendance, or my effort towards conversion or retention, and so on, right? My effort has contribution margins. So whatever effort I'm putting in is going to contribute a little bit towards everything, but there is always a primary driver towards my contributions. So that's how you should look at these numbers. They will finally all add up to the 20% on the top, right? In terms of 20% the top. And this is the kind of ladder. Now if you are in engineering, and if you have been given this goal, right, that if you are in engineering and you say that I'm going to work on this resume anytime feature, and that resume anytime will give me 12% extra completion rate. Now you can start looking at, okay, I'll look at this feature, it is going to give me more retention, and thus how am I going to drive more revenue for the company. So if somebody asks you today, what do you do, I would say that, um, I would discourage you from talking in terms of, I work on Java, or I work on Python, I use AI. Those are tools, right? Start talking in terms, and not even talk in terms of, okay, I delivered so much of code last week. I built this, I built that. Okay, but do you have even one customer on what you built? Do you have an ROI analysis on what you built? Do you have a hypothesis on whether you will be able to sell that? So the best is to start talking in terms of outcomes, and that's where people will start listening. Let's see how, right? So in example one, at an individual level, you're talking about the API latency. So towards my completion, I will look at my API latency, and I'll pull it down. At an engineering metric level, how it helps is going to be the page load time comes down. At a product level, how it helps is that my quiz participation is going to go up, and at a company level, it is going to finally help my completion rate, right? This is the kind of linkage you should be able to talk about when you talk about what do you do. Okay, so start not talking about your individual metric, but start talking about how your work is influencing the company KPI. All right. Another example of engineering contribution to revenue, you did some database indexing, it reduced the latency by 50%, improved your completion rate by 12%, and thus it gives you a 8% upside in revenue. So you did not just write code, right? What you did is you generated 8%, or you influenced 8% of revenue uplift. Okay, so what work do I do? I influence revenue through my work. And then here is how I do it, right? That's the best way. The leading statement, the leading comment should be about the outcome you're producing, and then you can talk about what output is guiding that outcome. Okay, so the takeaways, so we talked a lot about, KPIs, metric, output, and outcome. The takeaways are, what are your individual goals, right? How are you measuring success as you move towards those goals? And then what is the ladder from here to there, right? You should be able to talk about this clearly and succinctly. And then the second takeaway is, are you watching the outcomes, right? What are the impacts that are you creating, right? So start talking in terms of outputs and impacts. All right. Then the next important thing, right, towards being a professional, and another highly desired kind of skill set in the industry, is the ownership mindset. All right. And to be able to understand this ownership mindset, let's look at the levels, right? There are certain levels of how the industry thinks about employee behavior. So one kind of employees are responsible employees. Okay. And by the way, all these are positive behaviors, all these are desired and good behaviors in the industry, but one is the most valued, right? And obviously, as you can see on the right most side, is the one that is most valued. Ownership is highly valued. Ownership, when I say ownership, I'm talking about ownership mindset, right? Is highly valued in industry. But there are people who are responsible, who take their job seriously, and they exactly do what they are told, right? So from a engineering perspective, if your job is to write code, then you're exactly building the specification, right? You're exactly writing the code. You're responsible to build a website which adds, which is a calculator which adds 2 and 2 and displays 4. And you did a stellar job. You built a great website, great front end. You build that calculator, and people are able to add. Okay, they can add two numbers on your website. Okay, so you have behaved responsibly. Now the accountability, right? So you built everything to spec, but does the test pass, and is the deployment stable? That is accountability. Now that comes at a slightly higher level, where you are talking about, I am accountable for the work that I deliver. Okay, I can be held responsible towards the KPIs of test passing, not just that I wrote my test, but of the test passing, and me being able to deploy my code in time, and the code working on the website, right? So I'm accountable for all of that. I investigate the failures, um, and I find a patch process. um, I'm able to drive the analysis of why something didn't happen. Let's say the user adoption to your calculator, website calculator that you built, is very low. Am I being able to figure out why are users not using the calculator on my website? Okay, so you feel accountable towards that low adoption also, and that's accountability. Again, highly desired in the industry. Both responsibility and accountability are externally assigned. Somebody is going to tell you that you are responsible for this and you are accountable for this. Okay, and you can always take responsibility and take accountability. What is not assigned externally but comes from within typically is the ownership mindset. And when I say ownership mindset, it is not, it can happen at various levels, right? Everybody can be a owner. The junior most person in the team can also be owning the piece of product that they are delivering. Okay, and it's a mindset, because you are now talking about what could be the bottlenecks. You are looking ahead, you are proposing optimizations, you are putting in checks and balances so that things don't fail. um, you feel responsible for not just the bug escape to production, and thus you're validating QA plans, but you're building automation suites, you're doing continuous improvements, you're mentoring your peers. There are several things that are happening because of which you're displaying the ownership mindset. All right, techniques. Okay, so if we look at kind of a summary of everything that we talked about, what will make you stand out, right? We talked about data quite a bit. We talked about how not to fight, how not to fall in the output trap, but start talking outcomes. Here is a simple you know technique. One, start with the end in mind. Whatever you're doing, what is the customer problem am I solving today, right? That's kind of a question that you should be able to answer. Then prioritize. So you have multiple solutions on the table. There is always multiple solutions, by the way. Then but what is the priority of today, right? What do I put ahead of the other one? All right, so that's number two. Number three is mapping the metric. Ensure your code is linked to a KPI. use that causality test. If you are able to prove that you are actually influencing a company KPI, it is going to bring you, um, you know, give you a lot of value and a purpose, a direction that you're running towards. And last is retrospective. The more time you spent on what went wrong and what needs to change for the future, it's going to help you that much, right? So build a ladder, and impact is the choice. Pick that choice. All right, then this is pretty much like almost the last few slides. So how is AI helping in all of this, right? Um, how can I get to smarter metrics using AI? So AI basically, identifies the hidden links between data points, which will help you pick better KPIs and predict, future trends instead of just showing the past results. So AI will give you kind of that acceleration now, that sometimes, we are all befuddled by, what is the right metric for me, whether there is enough linkage and so on. AI will now help you get there much faster. Pull that data, put it in a, the nice format and so on. But what to do is something, what AI should be doing is something which is in your control. Don't let AI control your business. Don't let AI tell you what KPI is important for you. You have to decide what API is important for you, and you can use AI's help to sharpen that KPI with the right kind of data pulls, with the right kind of insights, with formatting, with visualization, and those kind of things, which are more like grunt work. So make AI your assistant, rather than putting AI in the control seat. Okay, the second one is real time visibility, right? It can give you dynamic, automated dashboards, can give you course correction, right? Remember, we talked about lead indicators, and the real time visibility is on everything that is an indicator leading to a certain event. And if AI has that power to detect and send you an alert that, I'm seeing this threshold drop under this level, is all that you need, right? And then you have to do the thinking job of figuring what is my next best course of action, and make use of AI again to change that course. Third is the objective management, right? So by pulling data directly from work tools, AI reduces human bias in performance reviews, and helps, set up more realistic data driven goals. So to remove bias, human bias especially, we feel fall in the trap of emotional thinking, right? And AI can help there. AI can put facts on the table. Hidden value, right? um, it can track soft wins, like, your better customer sentiment, right? And risk mitigation alongside traditional revenue and cost savings and so on, right? So those kind of things, AI can help drive that hidden value. Again, what you want, you have to define whether that's important for you to keep and look at. You have to define, use that causality test to figure out whether you're using a validated metric or is it a vanity metric, and act accordingly. And of course, accessibility with, with the natural language tools, they are allowing everybody to ask questions in simple English language and get insights, in a scientific engineering format, or a financial format that people like to look at, right? So I think that is the power of AI. In summary, one, you be in control of what you want. Make AI your assistant or your co-worker. Use AI where there is repetitive grunt work, and these hidden insights. Use AI for acceleration, um, but you keep the thinking and the decision making to yourself, right? So that was pretty much, um, regarding today's session on metrics and outcome. In summary, we talked about metrics, measurement, KPIs, ladders, how company thinks about outcomes, how you should bring outcomes in your language, how companies define KPIs and annual goals, and how do they cascade to every team. How does every team think about contribution margins towards a top goal? And then later on, we talked about the ownership mindset as well as the usage of AI. Feel free to write to us, and we'll be happy to answer more questions if you have. Thanks, and have a good time ahead.